I think that it's not that religious people are stupid. Like, that's not really what the problem is. What it is people grow up inside of systems of thinking. And because they grow up inside of those systems of thinking, that really imports into their mind whole these entire systems.
Which religion are you, if any?
I'm not religious in the least. And I'm not really against it in my own life. But, no, let's say that again. You don't have to say your part. I'm not religious in the least, and I have a strong suspicion that religions are a kind of fantasy.
And why are you not religious, would you say?
I guess I already answered that, didn't I? Because of this kind of notion of fantasy. I have no problem with many beliefs. For instance, the belief in rabbit's feet. Like if I cut the foot off of a mammal and I take it onto an airplane with me, the airplane ride will be safer because I've got the foot of another mammal around my neck. I said, that doesn't really bother me except for the cutting off of somebody's foot to let this happen. But there's lots of things that are fairly innocuous, like if I'm going to flip a coin, for instance, to try and decide something about my own fate, then I think that's totally fine. I'd rather maybe be a more reasoned approach, but the trouble with organized religions, and a lot of the unorganized ones as well, is this sort of fantasy that you have a person up in the sky who's watching out for you and taking care of you, means that you abdicate from almost all responsibility in your own life for what you're doing and what you should be doing. I don't have to do anything if there's someone taking care of me. It's like, should I get out of bed this morning and go to work? No, I'll just get God to do it. It's like, well, I think that is patently ridiculous, and I think you have to take responsibility for your own actions, responsibility for your own life. And it's a way of kind of growing up. Daddy is not taking care of you anymore. It's time for you to take care of yourself.
And how did you come to the conclusion of how you think?
I guess when I was young, I thought about this sort of God construction. And it occurred to me, after reading some philosophy in high school, that, people really have struggled with this question for thousands of years, and it is fairly straightforward, I think, that it's not answerable. And since it's not answerable, there's really no reason to think about it anymore. It's ridiculous to try and close with a question that cannot be answered. I wonder what toast would be like if it was in the middle of the sun. Who cares? It makes no difference. You can't test that right now, so let it go. Just eat your toast out of the toaster.
How was the Earth created in your mind?
Oh, the Earth was not created in my mind. We should straighten that out right away.
Okay.
But also, it wasn't, I don't believe personally, and I don't know, of course, I wasn't around for all this going on, but I don't believe that that there was any creation at all. I think what we have is we have a collection of collisions that happen over deep space-time. And so the Big Bang Theory is a theory that people toss around, and it makes more sense than anything else we know. And it's really interesting that when we check the Doppler shift of stars, that we find the stars are actually moving further apart, and galaxies are moving further apart. Say, well, an explosion will do that. So we live in this kind of moment, this universal moment of the aftermath of the explosion. And so in the aftermath of the explosion, all sorts of things happen. An airplane, for instance, falling down still has insects that are running around in the walls, even though the airplane's falling out of the sky. And so we live in that moment of the airplane falling out of the sky, and we are those insects. And so the Earth wasn't created, the Earth was a chance collision of a bunch of heavy elements. And so we live on the surface of this spinning rock out in the void. And unfortunately, there is no great hand way off in the distance, like our fantasy would have, that will control this spinning rock. And the dinosaurs found that out, much to their grief. They probably were praying on their knees as the asteroid hit the planet and wiped them out.
Wow.
And the praying didn't make a big difference.
And how do you think the world will end?
Well, as far as like life on the planet, likely it will be baked off with the expansion of the sun. So if the astrophysicists are correct, and the sun is going to eventually collapse in on itself and then expand and become a red giant, then that will bake life off the surface of, well, Mercury's already baked clean. Venus will lose all of its atmosphere, be blasted away by the solar wind and by the explosion, and the sun will expand to this vast red giant, and that will bake life off the surface of the planet. As far as between now and that moment, though, and millions of years hence, then we don't really need to worry about life ending.
Do you believe there is life after death?
I believe that our biological selves are a kind of biological machine, an intricate device. And as far as we know, that's all there really is to it. And so this intricate device eventually will run down and die. It's true. I'm 45 years old. I will likely be dead in about 30 years, tops. And so in 30 years, I'm dead. The intricate device has run down. We treat it like garbage. We bury it in the ground somewhere, and then it rots. But the thing about biological devices, when they rot, they don't just disappear. And so what I am, the various components that make up what I am, will be absorbed by the soil and taken up by other animals and transferred around. So life itself didn't really disappear. I disappeared as a kind of unit of life, or I got absorbed by other as a kind of unit of life. But as far as the fantasy of like, like the ghost going up to heaven or going straight down to hell or sideways to somewhere else, that to me is a pure fantasy. I think that it's wishful thinking to think that I'm never going to die. What possible difference does it make if I'm never going to die?
Mm-hmm. And I do have a few questions for you off the cuff.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to answer those, but for you, what's the difference between being an atheist and being an agnostic?
As people will say, there are kind of a multitude of definitions of this. It's sort of like the definition of being gay. People smear that definition all over the place. But atheism is atheism, and so, which is like amorality. And so it's a person who is not necessarily against, but does not have. So atheism does not have theism, does not have a God. And an agnostic is a person who really doesn't know, and who's willing to say, I just don't have a clue. And I think that an agnostic, really, that definition of agnostic, the one I'm using, is the only position of the thinking individual.
Mm-hmm. Do you think religion is really bringing down our world? Like, do you think we would be better off without religion?
It's really hard to say. We've never tried that experiment. Right now, we have all sorts of bodies of belief right across the planet. And people will say the bodies of belief have caused different grief. Like in the US, they will claim that the Muslim religion caused people to smash into the buildings in New York. Say, well, it wasn't really the religion that caused them to do that. There were all sorts of other geopolitical and social things going on, as well as we do have isolated crazies, religion or no. And so it's not really, our world isn't a machine run by religion necessarily. What it is a machine in which that has a kind of flaw or an extra feature, which is religion. And what society would look like with religion stripped out, we just really don't know. We've never tried the experiment. We have little isolated pockets of people who say, I don't believe. But those people are surrounded by a whole culture shoving different religions down their throat. And I don't just mean Christianity or Buddhism or anything like that. I mean all the religions. The religion that a man, if he appears big and strong, is a more worthy candidate for breeding. Like all these kind of folk beliefs that are at their basis just nonsense.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any final words on religion, and do you hope it disappears someday, or?
I would like. There's a few things about religion. I would like the folk beliefs that we have inherited from the historical past. I would like those to be updated so that they are actually usable. So that people can take those folk beliefs and say, okay, well, this antique part of it, like women not cutting their hair, let us update that folk belief so that it actually fits in with our world and makes the world a better place. So I'd like to see that happen. If we're going to hang on to these archaic structures, we should at least make them work for us instead of working against us.
And I do have one more question for you. Now let's just say heaven is real, our like the Christian or the Catholic heaven.
Okay.
And you're up to the pearly gates, and God is saying, "Well, why didn't you really believe in me?" What would you say to him?
I would say that, well, if you exist at this moment.
Well, because you're seeing him right now, so.
Okay, so if this thing in front of me is a real
Correct.
God, in the interpretation that we have, the Christian interpretation, then I would say, well, God, you made me someone who is skeptical of what's going on in the world around me. I guess you should answer that question yourself. Why didn't I believe in you? You made me this way.
It's a good answer. And anything final, or is that it?
No, that's it. That's a wrap.